Hey there, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Webcomics Confidential. And we're going to do a little follow-up to the previous podcast and then touch on a couple of other topics that are kind of swirling around out there. But first, before we go any further, if you remember last podcast and you haven't listened to it, by all means do. I was talking directly to a web cartoonist that had been working for 12 years and really wasn't getting to where he needed to go financially with this and was faced with the decision of what to do. And we talked in some very real, some very frank terms that this was not time to quit necessarily, but it was time to put a stop on doing that comic and go into what I termed a creative cocoon, where you stop all work on a live project, concentrate on the other areas of your life that need attention, and just start filling sketchbooks for no one else but yourself, to be used perhaps years down the road, not months, years. This is something that requires a full stop. This isn't just take a pause. This is take a full break and start filling that sketchbook, not with your current characters, not with your current storyline, or anything like that. Just complete freedom, whatever you want to draw on that day, with the idea of letting those sketchbooks stack up and pulling them out years later, when you're ready, when your life is at a different place. I was holding my breath after posting that because we're talking about a very emotional issue. We're talking about something that somebody's poured his or her life into for several years. And you're talking about more than just should I update tomorrow. You're talking about an entire psychological... unfortunately, most of us take this as a psychological defeat. It's really not. In fact, it's self-care. It's taking care of yourself and your family and doing what needs to be done. Right? Just straight up logic. If you objectively looked at this in anybody else's life, you'd see very clearly that this is what needs to be done. So I was holding my breath when I posted that, and the person wrote back on webcomics.com and was very open about their response to this. I've asked permission to read it here, and that permission was generously granted. So here's the response from the person I was talking to in the previous podcast. After a very nice opening, this person says, I can say without a doubt that I have no intentions of arguing with you on this. My wife and I both watched the video all the way through, and afterwards I said to her, I have nothing to argue about. He's right. This whole situation has been weighing on me for a long time now, well before my taking a part-time job, well before our second kid. I was just too damn stubborn to do anything but to try to push onward. But I guess a horse can't take you any farther when all of its legs are broken. That was a rather grim metaphor. Sorry about that, he writes. I can also promise you with 99.99% certainty that once I close the doors on my comic, I won't be starting a new venture in a few months or even within a year. I don't have it in me. Years ago, I probably would have, but I have no fight left. And that's the big indicator that I need to stop. I literally felt like a weight was lifted off me after watching this video and getting confirmation of what I already knew in my heart. I'm going to be sad, I'm going to feel guilty, and we're going to put a little asterisk by that. I'm going to come back to that. But I also already feel so much happier knowing that I'm putting this to rest after giving it my all. So thank you again for your words of tough love and point-blank honesty. I can't say I'll be returning to webcomics specifically, although who knows, but I have many creative projects that have been lined up for years waiting to get some attention. And after wrapping myself in a cocoon for a few years, I can't wait to see those projects blossom. On a humorous side note, I'm flattered that you thought I was as young as you did, and my wife laughed about it. I'm actually 36. Well, my friend, speaking as somebody who's pushing 40, you are still quite young, and yeah, I can say with confidence that my original assertion was right. You have many, many years on this planet. Take good care of yourself. You should be okay. Yeah, all right. Asterisk, or asterisk with an SK, not an X. Asterisk, guilt. You were doing so well up until there. Fuck the guilt. All right? You have nothing to feel guilty for. Release it. It's counterproductive. It's negative. It's bad for you, and you have no reason to feel guilty. Take a look back over your comic. You had many years of creative enjoyment. You did something that some readers were very excited about, very happy to read. This thing didn't grow into a self-sustaining business, but that doesn't mean that you failed in any stretch of the imagination. In fact, I don't know, guilt is so not the word I wanted to read there. I want you to really pat yourself on the back for making a grown-up, see, now I'm condescending. As soon as you find it out you're 36, now I'm going to treat you like a kid. You made a very mature, that's another word for grown-up. You know what I'm trying to say. You made a smart decision. You made a dispassionate decision. You made an objective decision on a very emotional topic. And you've got nothing to feel guilty about. And I am jealous of those two kids because if you put this kind of passion into being a dad that I've seen you put into comics, then I know that's going to be a big success. So congratulations. And again, the nice thing about talking about this as not quitting but going into a cocoon is that marvelous things erupt from cocoons. Miraculous things happen inside cocoons, and beautiful things come out. But you've got to be willing. You know, when a caterpillar or a worm goes into a cocoon, it turns completely into a liquid. If you look at the research, scientists are still baffled as to what happens because they can expose the caterpillar to certain stimuli, and then when the butterfly comes in, expose it to that same stimuli, and somehow that recognition transfers from one thought to the other, even though that caterpillar in between had completely liquefied itself. In other words, part of this means allowing everything that you were up until now to completely dissolve and liquefy and completely vanish, completely leave. That takes a leap of faith, okay? And but I think you can look forward to something really beautiful coming out of that. And that's why I like the word cocoon so much. I think it's a descriptive word for what we're talking about. And I don't like to talk about failure. I don't like to talk about things like quitting and failure. Which brings me to my next topic. Something really interesting happened to me, and it does, surprisingly enough, for the braying jackass that I am. This does not happen often. But I saw a Facebook friend talking about his recent Kickstarter that failed to reach its goal. And he said he had posted some plans on the Kickstarter page. I went over and took a look. And this he was talking about relaunching at a later date, but also launching with a lower goal and then taking business loans to bridge the gap left over between the Kickstarter lower goal and what he actually needed. And he also talked about taking on a lot of upfront costs like trademark processing, which I just trademarking Evil Inc. I think cost me upwards of $500. It's not a simple process. It's not a cheap process. And I'm taking a look at him, and he's definitely this other guy. He's even younger than you. Okay, he's 35. A young couple. They've got a baby, and it bugged me. It bugged me. I usually stay out of this stuff, but I was kind of moved to talk to him on Facebook, and I said, listen. I can't caution you strongly enough against what you're talking about. This Kickstarter didn't reach its funding, and that tells you something. Longtime Webcomics Confidential viewers are going to know what I'm going to say next. It told you through free market research that either you weren't ready for the market or the market wasn't ready for you. See, you knew I was going to say it. But it's true. And you got free market research, and this thing, it's not its time. For whatever reason. And you've got to take an objective look at that before you can fix what's broken. And the answer is not to take out a business loan, and the answer is not to take on a bunch of upfront costs in hopes that this thing is going to go on. And if you do, you're going to put your young family behind a financial 8-ball. You're gonna dig them into a hole financially that you guys are going to spend decades digging yourself out of. I found myself unfriended within the hour. And that doesn't happen to me often. Surprisingly enough, I have a pretty good track record with not getting offended or not getting unfriended for being offensive. However, I got to tell you, I'd say it again in a heartbeat, and I hope that after this person cools down a little bit, they think about the intention behind what I said, and really give this a lot of thought. I can't caution you guys enough, especially in the day and age of both Kickstarter and Patreon, against putting your own money up against this stuff. If your Kickstarter doesn't fund, it's not a failure. We've talked about that before. But it does mean that you need to rethink something. Somebody came in and she was a wonderful example of exactly that. She said, yeah, my first Kickstarter didn't fund and it crushed me, right? But I took a look at what I was doing, and she made some changes, and she's made a lot of changes in her approach and what she's doing. And now she's on her second of 2 successful Kickstarters from that point. And you can see just by looking at her work that she learned so much from that first quote-unquote failure, from the first time that first Kickstarter didn't fund. That's the example of what to do. That's in fact, I was kind of like, Geiger, you got to put your money where your mouth is. I became a Kickstarter backer. Her Kickstarter's still going on. I became a backer. Because sometimes you gotta put your money where your mouth is, and I want to see this thing. She's at 200% funding. She's got it. She's just carrying it over the goalpost now. But I wanted to support that kind of thinking. I wanted to support that kind of attitude towards comics, and when I did. Here's just another little tangent. She had already made up this perfectly social media sized image, a little avatar, which said basically thank you for supporting my Kickstarter, but it was an image. So when I said, and by the way, this is super smart. I'm totally stealing this. You want people to go out on social media and say, I backed this Kickstarter, or I'm a Patreon supporter, blah, blah, blah. You having a little avatar that's ready, set up, ready to go, and you pop that in there is super good positive reinforcement. That's amazing that she had that ready to go and just plopped it right in there. It's a stealable idea, very stealable. Now, as long as let's see, have I offended any of you yet? Hopefully not. But maybe I will now. Here's our third or fourth little mini topic. As long as we're talking about crowdfunding, or actually, this goes further than crowdfunding. As we're talking about this topic, somebody came in and said, my goal next year is to sell 20 comics. And if I can do that, then I know that I'm doing good. And I said, what are you talking about? 20 copies of a comic title of a run? And the person says, yes, if I can sell them fast, then I'll print more. That doesn't make any sense to me. If he's number one, if he's doing it like this, he's probably doing print on demand, which means that his profit from the individual sales of that 20 comics is probably like $1, $2 at the most. You can't be making very much unit profit from a print on demand thing. And it tells me that you're probably not using crowdfunding for the upfront. You're paying that stuff out of pocket. None of that is right. You gotta break yourself out of that mindset. But then he said something that really, really set me off, and it's going to be the last topic I cover today. This thing really, he said, I think people want to avoid indie books because they instantly think it's amateur crap not worth buying. So here's the deal. How many times have you heard somebody say this at a comic convention, right? Well, people don't like to buy amateur stuff because they think it's crappy. And the more that we allow each other to say stuff like that without calling each other on our own collective bullshit, the more it's going to go on, and it's harmful. And I'm going to tell you why. Because we all know, those of us who are talking here, we all know that people will buy anything if the quality is good. And it doesn't matter whether it's professional or amateur or indie or small press. It doesn't matter a whit whether this thing is published with a Marvel logo on it or no logo at all. If it's good, if the quality is good, then people will buy it. People are not avoiding your comic because it's an indie press situation. They're not avoiding buying it because it doesn't have a publisher behind it. They're not buying it because your quality isn't there. And the longer you fool yourself about people having a predisposition against amateur comics, the more you are going to avoid addressing the real problem, and that is that either you need to practice more, you need to improve yourself, you need to take an objective look at the product you're putting out and how it compares to the ones around you that are successful, or maybe you just need to work harder or reassess where you're putting your energies, and is that a good thing? Prime example is, and we see this in comics all the time, somebody who can draw their butt off cannot write their way out of a paper bag. I would encourage you, if your comic isn't doing as well as you think it is, I would encourage you to consider that primary culprit number one. That's the number one usual suspect, and try to get some real honest, brutally honest people to read it and give you a response. Chances are the writing just isn't there. It just isn't compelling. There are a number of well-drawn, horribly written comics out there, and many of them are telling themselves that there's a predisposition against amateur comics, or 100 of other of these excuses that we hear bandied about in Artist Alley all weekend long during a comic convention. There's a lot of excuses out there, tons of excuses out there. And the longer we keep trying to avoid the truth with these weak excuses, the longer it's going to take for us to finally get to the heart of the matter. So please, try to catch yourself. I know I've used some of these excuses in the past. I know I've heard them a ton of times. We need to do better by each other. And we need to call ourselves on our bullshit, and we need to call our friends on their bullshit when they start going down these roads. Because the more we allow this kind of stuff to go on, again, the longer it's going to take for people to actually address the real problems. And that's what leads to somebody like our first, and I'm not saying that this is what happened specifically to him, but it leads to a very similar situation where you can spend 10, 12, 20 years on something and never realize that there's a basic common flaw to this. And you've never addressed it because you spent all your time saying, well, but I guess people don't like amateur comics. Nah, people like comics that are good. They don't like crappy amateur comics. And you may be destined to be an amateur, but you're not destined to be crappy. And crappy can be fixed. Okay? So that's my thoughts on that. Kind of a potpourri Webcomics Confidential. You got some thoughts? You got some reaction? By all means, go to webcomics.com. Hit me in the comments and let me know what you think. And also, thank you again to the letter writer from yesterday's podcast. Thank you for allowing me to talk about this and to share your response. I am looking forward to great things coming from you in the future. Once again, this is Brad Geiger, Webcomics Confidential, and we'll see you next time.